You are not stuck because life is hard. You are stuck because the version of you that built this life is no longer capable of living it. That is the paradox no one warns you about. The habits that once protected you now suffocate you. The beliefs that once gave you meaning now quietly poison your future. And the most dangerous part is this. You still wake up every day trying to solve a new life with an old mind. You call it comfort. You call it stability. But beneath the surface, something in you already knows the truth. This life is over. It just hasn't ended yet. You feel it in the pauses between your thoughts, in the way silence makes you uncomfortable, in the way you scroll endlessly, not for pleasure, but to avoid hearing your own inner voice. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are outgrowing a self you no longer have the courage to bury. And until you do, personal development will feel like motivation videos, productivity hacks, and shallow affirmations that never quite touch the real problem. Because starting a new life does not begin with action. It begins with destruction. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. Every civilization understood this except ours. The Stoics wrote about it. Machiavelli observed it in power. Ancient initiations were built around it. Before transformation, there was always symbolic death. The old identity had to be dismantled publicly, painfully, and completely. Today, we skip that step. We try to upgrade ourselves without uninstalling the software that keeps crashing our system. You cannot build a new life on a personality that was designed to survive an old one. Look at your patterns, not your goals. Your patterns. Who you trust, what you tolerate, what you run from, what you overthink, what you numb. These are not random. They are adaptive responses. At some point, this version of you learned how to stay safe. Maybe safe from rejection, maybe safe from failure, maybe safe from responsibility, and it worked. Until it didn't. Now that same survival strategy is quietly sabotaging your growth, and you call it fate. Machiavelli warned that the greatest threat to power is not the enemy outside the walls, but the complacency inside them. Your enemy is not the world. It is the internal ruler that refuses to give up control, even though it no longer knows how to lead. Starting a new life means overthrowing that ruler, and no ruler steps down peacefully. But before we go there, understand this: personal development is not self-improvement. Improvement assumes the core is correct. Development assumes the core must evolve. That is why most people fail. They polish the armor instead of questioning why they still need to wear it. They chase discipline without asking what fear their discipline is hiding. They build routines around a life they secretly resent. A new life does not begin when you add something. It begins when you subtract the lie. The lie is this: that you are who you have been. Identity feels solid, but it is fluid. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you become what you repeatedly think, not what you want, not what you say. What you repeatedly think. Your thoughts are not innocent. They are architects. And right now, most of your thoughts are designing a future that looks suspiciously like your past. Watch your inner dialogue. It is not neutral. It is trained, conditioned, rehearsed over years. Every excuse you make today was once a protective mechanism. Every limitation you defend once saved you from pain. But survival is not the same as living. And the mind that learned how to survive chaos will create chaos if peace threatens its identity. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. Your environment is shaping you more than your will ever could. You don't rise to the level of your motivation. You sink to the level of your standards. And standards are enforced by environment. The people you talk to, the content you consume, the spaces you inhabit. You think you are choosing freely, but most of your behavior is unconscious mimicry. You copy what feels normal. If dysfunction is normal, growth will feel like betrayal. This is why starting a new life often requires solitude, not loneliness. Solitude, a deliberate withdrawal from noise so you can hear what you actually think without the echo of others. Nietzsche wrote that the individual must be prepared to stand alone if they wish to create new values. If you cannot tolerate being misunderstood, you will never escape who you used to be. You say you want a new life, but you keep the same conversations, the same jokes, the same complaints, the same digital diet. You expect transformation without friction. But friction is the signal that something real is happening. Comfort is not peace. Comfort is sedation. Think of the snake. It does not negotiate with its old skin. It does not decorate it. It sheds it or dies. And the process is violent. It rubs itself raw against stone. That is personal development, not inspiration, not motivation. Pressure. The first step in starting a new life is radical self-honesty, not the kind that flatters you, the kind that costs you something. You must look at your life as if you were a stranger analyzing a case. No excuses, no self-pity, just patterns. Results don't lie. If your life feels small, constrained, repetitive, that is not bad luck. That is feedback. But here's where most people flinch. They realize that changing their life will require disappointing people who benefit from them staying the same. Your old self is useful to others. Predictable, agreeable, easy to manipulate. The moment you change, you disrupt unspoken contracts. And humans fear social exile more than death. That fear is ancient, tribal, deeply biological, which is why your brain will sabotage you the moment growth threatens belonging. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that the reformer has enemies in all those who profit from the old order and only lukewarm defenders in those who would benefit from the new. Starting a new life means accepting temporary isolation. You will be misunderstood, you will be doubted, you will be tested. Not because you are wrong, but because your growth exposes others' stagnation. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. Your biggest obstacle is not fear of failure. It is fear of responsibility. Because a new life removes excuses. If you truly change, you can no longer blame your past, your parents, your circumstances. Power is heavy. Freedom is heavy. And many people unconsciously choose suffering because it is familiar and blamable. Stoicism teaches this mercilessly. You control your judgments, your actions, your responses. Nothing else. Once you internalize that, victimhood collapses. And with it, the comfort of being wronged. Starting a new life means giving up the emotional payoff of being the victim in your own story. This is why discipline feels violent at first. Not because it is hard, but because it contradicts your identity. Every time you act against your old patterns, there is cognitive friction. Your mind will say, this isn't you. And for once, it will be right. That is the point. You don't become a new person by thinking differently once. You become a new person by behaving differently until your mind has no choice but to catch up. Action precedes belief, always. Confidence is not built by affirmations. It is built by evidence. Small, brutal, undeniable evidence that you are no longer who you were. But be careful. A new life does not mean a busy life. Many people mistake chaos for progress. They fill their days with activity to avoid stillness. Stillness is where the old self panics, because in silence the masks fall off, and you see the gap between who you are and who you could be. That gap hurts, but it also guides. The ancient rites understood this isolation. Fasting, silence, stripping away excess. Today, we drown that discomfort in stimulation, and then we wonder why we feel empty. You cannot hear your intuition if your life is always loud, but there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. At some point, you must choose your suffering. Because suffering is unavoidable, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret, the pain of growth or the pain of stagnation. One builds you, the other erodes you, and the cost compounds quietly over time. Look at people 10 years older than you, not the successful ones, the bitter ones, the cynical ones. They did not wake up one day and choose misery. They made small compromises daily. They postponed courage. They told themselves they had time. And time collected interest. Starting a new life is not about becoming exceptional. It is about becoming intentional. Most lives are lived by default. Yours doesn't have to be, but intention requires clarity. You must decide what kind of person you are willing to become, even if it costs you comfort, approval, and certainty. This is where values matter, not goals. Goals change. Values anchor. Stoicism emphasize virtue over outcome for a reason. You can lose outcomes. You cannot lose character without participating in the loss. If your values are unclear, your life will be reactive. If they are clear, decisions simplify. Ask yourself, what do I refuse to compromise on, even when no one is watching? That answer is the foundation of your new life. Everything else is decoration. And now, the part no one likes to hear, you will fail repeatedly. Not because you are incapable, but because identity change is nonlinear. You will relapse into old habits, old thinking, old fears. The difference is this: the old you will use failure as proof to quit. The new you will use it as data to adjust. Shame keeps you stuck. Responsibility sets you free. Machiavelli wrote that men judge more by the eye than by the hand, because everyone can see, but few can feel. You must learn to feel your progress internally before the world reflects it back. External validation comes late. Often too late. If you need applause to continue, you will stop when the room goes quiet. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. Eventually, if you persist, something strange happens. The effort decreases, the resistance fades. What once felt forced begins to feel natural. This is not because you found an easier path. It is because your identity has shifted. The behaviors that required discipline now require effort to avoid. This is the point of no return, where your new life stops being a project and starts being who you are. And here is the final paradox. When you truly start a new life, you stop trying to escape the old one. You integrate it. You understand why you were who you were. You forgive yourself, not softly, clearly, without excuses. You take responsibility without self-hatred. And in that moment, the past loses its grip. Starting a new life is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming honest enough to let go of who you were pretending to be. So here is your call to action, not a challenge, not a program, a decision. Tonight, remove one thing that reinforces your old identity, one habit, one conversation, one distraction, one lie you keep telling yourself, and replace it with silence. Sit with the discomfort. Let it speak. That voice you've been avoiding knows exactly what to do next, because the truth is, you were never stuck because you didn't know how to start a new life. You were stuck because starting a new life requires the death of the old one. And that is exactly where we began, not because the path is unclear, but because clarity is terrifying. When confusion ruled your life, you could hide, you could delay, you could pretend. But once you see yourself clearly, You are responsible for what you see. And responsibility is heavier than ignorance. The Stoics warned about this burden. To see reality as it is, not as you wish it to be, is the beginning of strength and the end of excuses. You start noticing how automatic you've been, how often you react instead of choose, how often your emotions hijack your behavior while you call it personality, anger, procrastination, overthinking. People pleasing, these aren't traits, they're habits. And habits can be dismantled. But first, they must be exposed to light. Here's the uncomfortable truth: your emotions are not commands. They are signals. Somewhere along the way, you learn to obey them instead of interpret them. You feel resistance, so you stop. You feel fear, so you retreat. You feel discomfort, so you distract yourself. This conditioned obedience is why your life feels smaller than your potential. Starting a new life means retraining your relationship with discomfort. You don't eliminate it, you use it. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. Discomfort is not the enemy. Avoidance is. The human brain is a master of avoidance. It will do anything to protect its current identity, even if that identity is miserable. This is why you can hate your life and still be terrified of changing it. Misery with familiarity feels safer than uncertainty with promise. Machiavelli observed this in politics. People tolerate a bad ruler longer than they tolerate instability. And you are no different. Your mind would rather rule poorly than risk chaos. So when you start changing, expect internal rebellion. Expect sabotage disguised as self-care. Expect thoughts like, you deserve a break, right when momentum begins. This is where discipline stops being about force and becomes about standards. Discipline is not pushing yourself harder. It is deciding in advance what you no longer negotiate with. Sleep, movement, focus, silence. These are not productivity tools. They are identity anchors. They signal to your nervous system that you are no longer living randomly, and randomness is the breeding ground of regret. You must understand something critical here. A new life requires a new rhythm. Same inputs, same outputs. You cannot consume chaos and expect clarity. You cannot feed your mind noise and expect wisdom. What you read, you watch. What you listen to. These are not harmless. They shape your inner world. And your inner world eventually becomes your outer life. The Stoics were ruthless about this. Guard the mind. Because what enters the mind becomes thought, and thought becomes action, and action becomes character. This chain is not poetic. It is mechanical. Break the chain at the source, or it will run automatically. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. At some point, you will realize that personal development is not about becoming stronger. It's about becoming harder to manipulate, emotionally, socially, psychologically. A developed person is not one who dominates others, but one who cannot be easily controlled by fear, flattery, or pressure. Notice how often you explain yourself, over-justify. Seek permission, seek reassurance. These are signals, not of kindness, but of insecurity. When you start a new life, you will speak less and mean more. You will choose actions that don't require announcements. Silence becomes power when it is backed by alignment. This shift unsettles people. They are used to your predictability, your availability, your emotional transparency. When you stop leaking energy, they feel the loss. Some will test you, provoke you, try to pull the old version back out of you. Not because they hate you, but because your change threatens their mental model of the world. This is where emotional mastery becomes essential. Stoicism teaches that if you are disturbed, it is not because of events, but because of your judgment about events. This sounds simple. It is not. It requires constant awareness. You must catch yourself in the moment your ego flares, when you want to react, when you want to prove, when you want to defend. That impulse is the old self fighting for relevance. A new life requires restraint, not suppression. Restraint. The difference is crucial. Suppression buries emotion. Restraint observes it and chooses differently. Power is not emotional numbness. Power is emotional literacy. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. Eventually, you will confront emptiness, not boredom, emptiness. The space that opens when distractions no longer work and old desires lose their pull. This phase scares people. They think something is wrong. They rush to fill it. Relationships, goals, noise. But emptiness is not a problem. It is a clearing. In ancient traditions, this was the void before rebirth. The self dissolves before it reforms. If you rush this stage, you rebuild the same life with different furniture. If you endure it, something authentic emerges. This is where values stop being theoretical. You begin to feel what matters, not what impresses, not what distracts, what sustains. Simplicity becomes attractive. Depth replaces novelty. You stop chasing intensity and start valuing meaning. And here is the irony. And as your life becomes quieter internally, it becomes more formidable externally. Decisions become faster. Boundaries firmer. Focus sharper. You no longer need constant motivation because your actions are aligned with who you are becoming. The friction disappears because you stop fighting yourself. Machiavelli would call this consolidation of power. The Stoics would call it harmony with nature. Different language. Same truth. When your inner hierarchy is clear, chaos loses leverage. But there is a deeper, more dangerous truth we haven't touched yet. You cannot go back. Not really. Once you see yourself clearly, ignorance is no longer available. You can pretend. You can delay. But you will feel the tension. The quiet dissatisfaction that grows every time you betray what you know. This is why half change is more painful than no change at all. So if you are going to start a new life, do not do it casually. Do it deliberately. Accept the cost up front. You will lose people. You will lose illusions. You will lose versions of yourself that once felt necessary. But you will gain coherence. And coherence is rare. Most people live fragmented lives. One face at work, another online, another alone. This fragmentation drains energy. Integration restores it. When who you are, what you think, and how you act align, life becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. And now, the final mirror. If you are still listening, it's because something in you already crossed the threshold. The old life no longer satisfies. The old explanations no longer work. You don't need more information. You need commitment, not to an outcome, but to a standard. So here is the second decision. Choose one behavior that the old you avoids because it feels uncomfortable, exposing, or demanding, and do it daily, quietly, without seeking recognition. Let this be the brick you lay every day in the foundation of your new life, not because it feels good, but because it feels honest. Because starting a new life is not about escaping who you were. It is about having the courage to stop lying to yourself about who you are becoming, and remember how this began. You are not stuck because life is hard. You are stuck because the version of you that built this life is no longer capable of living it.